Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Fresh Goods, everyone. I'm Jara. This is Ethan, and we have our guest today, Daniel Principe. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it's Principe. It's good.
Oh, okay, well, close
It's
enough.
good. Dan's good. Like when I'm touring around and in schools, like, you know, the deputy or the principal will be like, how do you want to be introduced? And I'm just like, just say, hey guys, Dan is here to speak with you.
Yeah.
And we'll move on from there. Like,
Okay.
keep it simple.
Yeah, right. Okay, so Dan is here with us
Dan's
today.
here with us.
Dan
Yeah.
is here with us,
The man,
and
Dan.
well, a little story of how I got to know Dan was actually when I was a chaplain, which was just last year. We had a youth care conference, a statewide conference, and we had a few speakers there, and Dan was one of them. And he was so, yeah, you were amazing. Like, you had me so engaged, and I mean, I say that for myself, but everyone on my table, and if not the whole audience, were just leaning into what you had to say about the work that you do, which we'll get into in a second. But yeah, we were all talking about it. We could listen to you talk all day, Dan. So very
Don't
excited.
tempt me. That's very kind of you to say.
No, honestly, very excited to have you with us today, and we look forward to where this conversation will lead. But yeah, why don't you start off with introducing yourself? You can tell us a bit about what you do and how you got to doing what you're doing right now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to share. So yeah, I work as a youth advocate and educator, which doesn't tell you much. That's like my title. But what I do is I travel around Australia working predominantly with young people in schools, but across, you know, religious organizations, not-for-profits, churches, whoever is open to having conversations about masculinity and sexuality primarily, and looking at what have we learned from the culture around us about bodies, about sex, about relationships, about love, about respect, about consent, and going, is this healthy or is it harmful? I'm not going to tell you what to think, but let's just go on a bit of a journey, kind of what we call media literacy or kind of critical literacy, by looking at the messages we receive from when we're little kids through TV advertisements, like pop cultural references, toys, games, like music videos, and ask ourselves, like, what are we learning about men and women through these depictions? What are we learning about sex, relationships, and dare I say it, love? And I'm sure you guys, given the work you do here, realize they're pretty significant topics, like how we relate to what it is to be a man or woman, how we relate to what relationships and commitment and respect is, like, has huge ramifications, and sex, like, for our lives, for our well-being, and those that we're in relationship with. And so my whole thing is, I certainly don't have all the answers, and I've seen the harm to myself and to others through my own life when I don't get those things right, when I don't value them with the respect and care and weight that they deserve. And I think it's just taking people to have that conversation as open, expansive, and just asking questions like, what have you learned from the world around you? What have you learned from culture, from your parents, through your mates at school? Is it helping you to thrive? Is it helping your relationships, or is it actually harming you? And where could we go to perhaps get healthier ideas for us?
Yeah.
Wow, so good. So how long have you been on this journey?
Oh, I think we're all on the journey from the moment we're children.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
good
yeah,
question.
absolutely,
But
yeah.
in terms of working, like, been doing this full time for almost 3 years, 4 or 5 before that as a labor of love. So I was working as an advisor in health and politics, looking at behavior change, but more as like big campaigns about health and well-being, mental health, whereas now it's like actually working with people directly, young people especially, talking to them, listening to them, hearing their stories, what's going on in their lives. And one thing I want to say up front, and obviously your audience is predominantly young adults, but if there are parents listening, like, the world that young people are growing up in is so vastly different. I don't feel old, but when I then step into a high school or sometimes I'm in upper primary, and like hearing the worlds of young people, it has changed. Like my first phone, like, Nokia 3310, okay?
You remember the numbers?
Okay? So the amount of mischief you can get up to is playing Snake on the back of a school
Right,
bus.
yeah.
Like, that's it. That's not the world young people are growing up in.
No, that's
You know,
true.
if you've got an internet-enabled device, whether that's a Samsung, an iPhone, you know, an iPad, like, you have access to the internet, and the internet has access to you, and all the horrors with that, as well as some of the wonderful things. But if you've got a developing brain and you're trying to navigate all that, that's unfair. It's an unfair fight. And what we know about social media and sexualized media is it's so harmful to young people, and especially the younger they are.
Yeah.
We're now seeing research longitudinal about the impacts on that on young people's well-being, and it's a concern. And the point is not to judge them; it's to say, hey, we the adults have created this. So what are we going to do to help them through it?
Yeah.
Because they didn't choose it, but they
Yeah.
have to navigate it.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Speaking of which, like I remember my early high school days, or even coming out of primary school, like upper primary to high school, talks of pornography and all that was, very apparent.
Okay.
And so it was kind of part of like conversations, just casual conversations even. So like knowing that you go into these schools and you talk to these boys and girls and all that, what's the best way to speak of these things, like the ramifications of what they're doing, and because maybe it's something that they enjoy, it's a comfort to them.
For
How do we
sure.
tell them otherwise?
Oh, there's so much in that. First, I just say I love that you are exposed to conversations about pornography because it's
Right.
like pretty like taboo for some people. I think we're
Yeah.
normalizing it, but probably normalizing it in bad ways.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, when it comes to this, like, we got to tell our own stories. We got to be real about it. And I recognize that there's a portion of the population that's never been exposed to pornography, but they are a minority, such as the internet.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, I was exposed to porn when I was 11. I wasn't searching for it. I wasn't seeking it out. I was shown by an older family friend, which I've now learnt is a crime. It's considered grooming according to the Crimes Act. If someone's over 18 and you're under 16, like it's considered grooming, right?
I see.
And it's sexual harassment to actually show somebody pornography. And yet that has become normative for sadly too many young people who are being shown this. But I think we have to start with our own story and how that's impacted us. I could give stats all day long on this, but I think bringing in and saying, hey, this is my story too. Like, I'm a man navigating my desires, navigating having a healthy relationship with myself, with my mates, with people of the opposite sex, with my future wife, and like, how do I do that well? How do I manage that in a world that I think is pornified? I call it porn culture. It saturates everything. And so I think acknowledging, like, that's the world I'm growing up in and it's affected me. I was exposed to porn and looked at porn for almost 10 years and until I quit, and it took me kind of 6 to 12 months to reboot my brain in my early 20s with a few relapses along the way. And we just got to be honest about that, and say it's hard. Hence, it's called the new drug by scientists and sociologists looking at how significant this can be in terms of its capacity to develop a compulsion. Some people call it an addiction. Not everybody agrees with that language, but it spikes dopamine in a way that mimics drug taking. And back to what you were saying, some people are using it to soothe. It feels good. Of course it feels good. So can I go on a rant on this? Because like, of course it's going to feel good. Like, we are hardwired sexual creatures. That's how we reproduce. That's how we create future generations. Like, it's innate to us. Now, every person has unique biology and unique social relational experiences that shape them and what they're exposed to and trauma and how that influences our understanding of sex and sexuality. So we're hardwired for it. And these billion-dollar companies know that, and they know how to tap into this, right? You have an endless internet that's selling you something that is going to spike your dopamine. It's going to make you feel good, something that you're wired for, that is intended for good. And so, of course, it's going to feel good. So people use this to cope. Like, it is that new drug. It's like, this is what you're going to go to soothe. And say, unlike alcohol or cigarettes or vaping now and other drugs, where there's serious public education campaigns to tell people, like, these are the risks, these are the harms. We've not had that for pornography.
No.
And yet it's free. It's accessible 24/7. You can consume it anonymously. And so, like, that's a significant risk factor. Some people who use the addiction framework says it ticks nearly all the boxes, which is what makes it so dangerous in terms of its compulsion, because there's not a lot that restricts that. And so as a society, we've done nothing to kind of stop that harm reaching younger and younger people. And I would say, of course, it feels good. Probably a law of diminishing returns where it feels less and less good, like alcohol. You need more alcohol to get that same buzz, more drugs to get that same buzz. Same with pornography, and that takes people down darker and darker and far more dangerous paths. And so I hear that, and I think it's important to acknowledge it, but acknowledge why based on our humanity and how our brains are wired and those natural desires for intimacy. And then I think there's another conversation to be had about, like, why porn? Like, what is it soothing? Why are we going there for it?
Right. Like the iceberg. There's more
Totally.
issues, right? Yeah. So in terms of going to these schools and speaking to these boys and girls, what do you tell the boys and what do you tell the girls?
Yeah.
Because is it the same thing that you're telling them, or
I
is
think
it
it's
slightly
got to be a
different?
slightly different emphasis,
Right.
and there's reasons for that, and we can unpack all of that. The reality is, boys are consuming pornography very differently to girls in terms of rates.
Absolutely.
You know, about 1 to 4% of girls consume it every single day. It's about 20% of boys.
Wow.
40 to 60% every week. Like these are huge numbers.
Yeah.
It should be a public health crisis,
Mm.
given it's associated both mental, physical, sexual, and relational harms it
Yeah.
contributes to. And so they're consuming it differently. They're looking at different things, but also given within the heterosexual context, boys and girls are learning very, very different ideas through heterosexual porn. Boys are learning, for the most part, that girls are up for sex anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And girls are learning that about themselves, that they should be up for that all the time. Boys are learning that they should enact violence on girls sexually and be degrading and dominant and coercive. And girls are learning to expect that. So it's very different in terms of, it's the same content, but it speaks very, very differently when we're looking at gendered roles within that.
Wow.
And so if we don't dissect that and approach it through that lens, then we're not going to equip them both respectively to, I guess, resist that harmful indoctrination. And as you know, hearing my talk at youth care, I talk about porn as propaganda and the most powerful form of propaganda because of those messages that are hardwired into it that people are consuming in a state of sexual arousal, which is when our brains are very likely to adopt the information that's shaping it and conditioning it. And especially if it's something that we do repetitively, it can really rewire those neural pathways. And so that is why I think we have to take a different approach. And I think the stats of the harms indicate that. It's not to say boys aren't harmed, but we're seeing how much more girls are harmed in terms of physical violence, sexual assault.
Yeah.
Does happen to boys, nowhere near the same amounts, and we're seeing more and more research of that of late. And so I think looking at that in terms of, boys consuming it, what is it teaching them? And I think what I want to say, though, and I should have said this at the beginning, is to step back and say, if someone is consuming, if they have been exposed, like, you're not bad or wrong. Like that's never my message. Yes, this is harming you and most likely harming your either present or future relationships. But you've been preyed on by $100 billion industry that knows how your limbic system works better than you do. You've been preyed on. And yes, you may go and hurt other people through your inability to love and understand sexuality in a healthy and a good way and a beautiful way, but you've been preyed on. If you're a 9-year-old boy on socials having porn pop-ups, which happens so routinely, you've not done anything wrong. You've been preyed on by an industry that has gone after you and a society that hasn't done anything to protect you. Because even the best parents, and I meet them all across the country, struggle to keep up with that. There's only so much you can do to keep your kids safe. When you're fighting against such big forces. So I just want to say to anyone listening, whether you're struggling with consuming porn, whether you've been exposed and feel bad once, whether a partner or older friend or someone has shown you, like, you're not at fault, you're not bad, you're not wrong, okay? And it's natural and normal to be curious about this. We need to start with that premise, but then ask some graciously curious questions about, well, what is it teaching us? How is it harming us? And the propaganda thing. How much is this shaping us to adopt beliefs about things that are really significant? And in your circles, we would hold these things to be sacred. You know, what is that teaching us about these things? And what can we do to equip all people, but young people especially, to resist those messages and to hope for something healthier and to actually go towards that in their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point of like changing your mindset with those that consume or struggling. To switch it up a little bit, change the perspective, reset a little. No, that's great. That's great. Before we continue, I've been hogging all the questions. Ethan, did you have anything to ask Dan?
I guess one big question, because I guess I'm a youth leader as well, and my kids are already kind of getting to that point where it's like very taboo and they don't know who to talk to and everything. How can, I guess, teachers, we're talking about parents, maybe even leaders, just like teach about it and like create a safe space for them, for the kids just to be able to come and just like talk about it and just go through that journey with them. You know
It's
what I mean?
so important and it's hard. And like, I'm not going to sit here and tell, parents of teenagers, just chill, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's tough. And we have to be vigilant. We have to be intentional, but we can't be fearful. We have to allow the opportunities for teachable moments and conversations. And I think the biggest part is equipping parents to realize like the culture has changed. This is sadly the world that young people are growing up in. I've spoken in similar communities culturally to yours in other parts of Australia. I remember being invited to speak at a particular church in Eastern Melbourne, and I had a lineup of 14, 15-year-old boys. And they came up to me after their youth event on Friday night where I'd spoken at, and they just told me one after another they were struggling. And I asked these boys, have you told mum and dad? Have you told your parents? Have you told mum and dad? No. Worried. Didn't want to upset them, didn't want to disappoint them, didn't want to burden them. So parents listening, like hear that. That's quite often what I hear from young people on all sorts of issues, why they don't want to tell mum and dad. That, there's a shame component, but there's this idea of I don't want to burden them. I don't want them to stress out. The boys especially might want to like handle it themselves when they're still not equipped to do so as yet. And I think that's why we have to continue to signal like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to shame you. I actually just want to support you and help you and to listen. Because the reality is it's not a matter of like, if your kid's going to be exposed, it sadly is when. And hopefully if those communication lines are open, it becomes a when, and then let's talk about it. Or a when, and we've already spoken about it and laid some good foundations that this stuff does exist on the internet, and we give age-appropriate information. So when it does happen, they can actually be like, yeah, mum told us about that. We knew to log off. We knew to give our device back to mum and dad to talk about it. Talk about how it made them feel. Were you curious? Were you scared? Were you, uncomfortable? And I think it's really important to sit with that because each child will have a unique experience.
It's true,
Kids go searching because they hear something on the radio or TV, or some kid at school tells them, and they go home and search for it. We can't judge them for that. They're just kids. They're trying to make sense of things that we couldn't comprehend in a world that enables that to come at them way faster. So I think we do have to be having these conversations like well before. Like, and in age appropriate ways. So you may not use the P word, you may not say porn, but you may say to your kids in primary school, like you might see private pictures or private videos of people without their clothes on, and that might be something that they can understand. And then you could, ask them a question, about that. Has anyone at school mentioned anything like this? Because it might be easy instead of saying, have you seen this? You could say, have your friends at school, has anyone said anything? That's an easier way for young people to usually engage on this in a way where they don't feel like they're being interrogated. And they might feel more comfortable to say, oh yeah, my friend at school said this once. And you're like, oh yeah, what did they say? So I think that's a really helpful way. And I think it's really important to normalize that. Because I heard one guy that I really loved, Gabe Deem. He was one of the first young men who was in Time magazine and Rolling Stone because he developed erectile dysfunction because of porn consumption. He was 20 years old, fit personal trainer, and it wrecked his sex life. That's what the porn industry won't tell you. That first time in human history, and I'm segueing a bit here, we're seeing adolescent boys with erectile dysfunction, like unheard of, right? But I loved Gabe's distinction. That's why I bring him up, giving some context. Is he said, like, we have to talk about this like it's something unhealthy rather than taboo. Because if we make it taboo and awkward and mum and dad get uncomfortable, my teachers get uncomfortable, my youth pastor gets uncomfortable, it's like, ooh, what's that? Like, ooh, that's mysterious. That's interesting. I got to find out. Whereas if you're like, yeah, this exists, and almost like normalize it in a sense of not normal like it's healthy, but like I'm not uncomfortable about it, because Gabe says it then becomes kind of like a forbidden fruit. Like, what is that? Ooh, what is that? That temptation, that thing that everybody's kind of whispering about and talking about. And so there's for me a sense of, to use like a bit of an analogy, it's like let the light in, like let's just kind of expose it in a sense for what it is. Talk about it, almost make it boring to talk about in a sense, like in the sense of let's engage people, but it's like, we've just talked about it. Like we've tried to bring as much facts and truth into this to equip people to do it well. And so that's what I think for parents, for pastors wanting to talk about this. bring in their own story. And
Yep.
I get it's easier for me as an outsider coming into schools or communities, churches, community events and talking about this because it's not my kids, you know, and I don't have to maintain the same professional relationship maybe like a school teacher and a student has.
Yeah.
But I think in our own personal lives and relationships, I think as much as possible, and for you guys within the context of a church community, like to just be honest about this.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of an incredible event within a church community on the East Coast, northern New South Wales, where they put together a montage of people within the church. And these just weren't fringe people. These were like pastors, elders, leaders, youth leaders who all they said was how old they were when they were exposed to normalize it. So it was like, this doesn't disqualify you from being a good human and being loved and having a future and contributing to your community. But it's just like, hey, it's something we've all had to navigate. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And I found that powerful. You know, I was like, wow, I love that authenticity to be able to do that and speak to that. So yeah, there's some things. I know I've said a lot there, but I hope there's some stuff there that can encourage us. I mean, what have you found work and how have you found like it for young people navigating this space?
No, I think definitely for what I learned from Jara most of the time, I think Jara was a great person that, you know, was able to talk to me just about just porn and just like how it's affecting the church and everything. And I think really when he talked about it, I was like really passionate just to talk about it with younger people because I realized like I was pretty young compared to like the older people who like got exposed to it because back then it was like magazines, right? Like you said, now it's like it's on my phone. It's like right here, like it's over there and everything. You know what I mean? You don't have to hide it under the couch or anything. You just gotta turn it off.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So I think I really like agree with you when it's just being authentic and just like letting light in. I think it's just like sharing stories and picking up little things from like what he's done in his journey and like what other people have done in their journey and just take that and try and apply practical things, I guess. And I really love how you speak to a lot of people about it, and I think that's why we keep doing episodes on it, I guess. It's like maybe the 4th or 5th time we're doing this now, and it's
a journey. Right? It's a journey.
But
I think it has to. I think it cuts to the core of so much we hold dear and sacred and recognize as important. And we're not going to see men and women and families and marriages thrive if we don't address this, you know, and what it's robbing us from. And I see that whether it's through shame or distraction or taking a man's energy away from good things that he could be focused on, you know, like, you know, I think it's not just like, oh gosh, he's doing this thing that's harming him and his family and the world at large. It's like, what's the good he could be doing? Where else could he be channeling his energy and his attention, you know, and not just him, but any person, you know, I think about it's that double loss that goes on with it all. And so, that's, I think why it's great that you guys are speaking to it. And I'm so encouraged to know that more faith-based communities are kind of bravely leaning into this space and wanting to address it and speak to it because I think, there is that need.
Yeah. And it's that desire to change as well. I noticed when you were telling us about those young boys that were lining up to get prayer or advice and all that, like people do want support. Yeah. And support shouldn't be so hard to find.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And like you were saying, like what frustrates me is like how accessible a pornography is and how not accessible support is.
That's right. Yeah, it's true. It is such a challenge and so much of it happens kind of organically. And in terms of support, I really want to speak to this because I'm concerned that sometimes we just don't take this as seriously. It seems like you guys are, but I can't not say this. Is sometimes people are like, Dan, just send me an article. And I'm like, this is a smart guy. He's in his 30s. He's in his 40s. It's like, he doesn't need any more information. Like if they're like 14, 15 and they've never heard about the harms of porn, like send some YouTube clips, like send some science on it that can help unpack it. That can help someone think about how's this going to shape my masculinity, my sexuality, my relationships. And that might be like a light bulb moment for them. But I think if you're someone who understands this and is still struggling, I think there's deeper issues. And especially if you've developed a habit and a compulsion. And I can say this because I've known good men who have struggled and who have brought this into their dating, into their marriages, and the impact and the hurt and the carnage this has caused to then have to unpick it all and like, where did this come from? Like, why am I going to this to soothe and to cope? and to actually get the healing that they need, you know, like to get the support, the therapy, the counseling. I know you and I the other day, we talked about the difference between accountability and intimacy, because sometimes the accountability word, I don't like it just because of how I think it can be weaponized. But they needed intimacy. And I'm more interested in intimacy than accountability because I think if like, you know, we're mates, we're journeying on this together.
Yep.
You get to see into my life, I get to share and listen into your life, and it's reciprocal. Like that's intimacy. It's not just me being like, how you doing, bro? Like, are you okay? And not giving anything of myself.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like it needs to be mutual. It needs to be a shared care and journey together.
Yep.
And so I'd really advocate for that. But I want us to think about like if you're someone who understands this is harmful, and you understand that because of the science, psychology, because of your faith, because of your understanding of ethics or justice, you don't need any more intellectual information. So there's got to be transformation here. There's clearly something else going on there.
Yep.
You know this is harmful, and you can know something, but it doesn't mean you're living that. So there's clearly other things we have to do to bring that into alignment. And I think people have to be open to, getting professional counseling and therapy with someone who is porn critical. I've heard people going to therapists who are like pro-porn.
That's crazy.
And it's called,
That's insane.
dude, it's more than that.
Insane.
And I hear the other side of this, and there's even more pain and heartache and terrible, terrible outcomes, as I'm sure wouldn't surprise anyone listening. So we have to be open to that. We have to be open to intimacy, accountability, whatever we want to call it, to actually make sure we stay on that journey. You know, and one of those things is just being real about it and doing that. It doesn't have to be with everybody, but one or two people that we can go on that journey with and be real with. Because I think sometimes, especially if it's within the context of a marriage, is like a spouse can carry too much of the emotional load. And it's like, that's unfair.
Yeah.
Of course, you're there through thick and thin through life. But I think especially for if it's a man's, like you need to find other support.
Yep.
You need to find other leaders in your life, other friends that you can journey with and to help you through this.
Yep.
And so I would say, like to make sure we go after those things. And for some guys I know, not far from here, they've had to take themselves to sex addiction fellowships. And I think to swallow our pride and to do these things because it matters, you know? And it's like, if you've been struggling with this for 10, 15, 20 years, and I said this to a guy, friend of mine I've known for a while, living on the other side of the country, and he called me one night and he's struggling and he's seeing the impacts of all this. And I said, bro, you're going to have to take this seriously. Like, you started consuming at 14 and you're 30 now. Your brain is seriously hardwired. It was affecting his relationship, his sex life, erectile dysfunction, all this stuff, all of it. And it's like, you're not going to overcome that by just reading a nice blog post.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, you're going to have to do some serious work on lots of levels of your own humanity to reboot, to restore. The good thing now and the hope is it's happened. We know that our brains are like neuroplastic. They can rewire themselves. And just to know, like one of the most hectic stories, and I interviewed this guy anonymously for my podcast. He was consuming porn like 6-7 hours a day.
Wow.
Like
straight.
Well, within the day. Like,
oh, wow. Okay.
You know, and you're like,
with breaks.
What the, like that.
That's insane.
But he took himself to a sex addiction fellowship. He's now been sober for 7-8 years, which is incredible.
Good.
Yeah.
He's like a father to girls, which I think was part of the motivation as well.
100%.
It shouldn't take that, but sometimes it does. Okay, let's be real. And like for me, I'm like, if he can recover, anyone can recover.
Yeah.
And we need to know that. Like there is no too far gone. We can all get healthier. And one thing to say as well, and I want to be really clear on this, is it's like we can be post-porn. We can recover from that. It still affected us. No one's like arrived. Even if you've not watched pornography at all, you've still grown up in a culture that is pornified. And we should all be trying to conform our desires, our sexuality, our definition of love, of intimacy to be something that looks more like love, of faithfulness, of kindness, of care. And I think we should all be on that journey. So you don't stop either. Like, and not that therefore you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, I'll never arrive. That for me, that's a beautiful invitation. It's like I should continuously be getting healthier no matter where we are on that journey, wherever we are. And I think that's another thing I think for church leaders to also say is like, hey, I'm on this journey too. I'm trying to conform my definition of love to be something that's transcendent, you know, and none of us can say we love perfectly. We've arrived. We use all our body, mind, soul, and strength and love everyone perfectly, including through our sexuality. No way. We're all on that journey. We're all getting healthier. And I think that's something to keep in mind as well as we care for others. It's like, no. I'm not some angel on a cloud like immune to this. Like, I'm still a man managing my desires, my drives in a sexualized culture, wanting to do that more and more healthily every single day.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. That's real good.
Yeah, that's real good.
It's a lot there.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because I think this is the question on every man's mind right now, is that, you know, you talk about counseling and this and that, like, you know, to take it seriously, which we all should. So at what point, because they're probably thinking, or even for myself, it's like, at what point should we be like, okay, I need counseling now? You did say porn critical, but do we wait until then, or do we go straight into it? Like, let's say someone that relapses once a month, for example. Is that enough to go into counseling?
I think there is no let me make a number, because like then someone will be like, well, I'm fine. At the end of the day, if this is something that you can't shake, you clearly need help in whichever way that can find you. And I just want to speak to, like, if you're waiting for marriage to deliver you, like, that is the biggest illusion and lie, and it's not up to your partner to help that. And I know people who have gone down that path. They've had a fulfilling sex life, and like, as in they're having sex, and they're still looking at porn. You know, so that's not the antidote, because it speaks to something else that's going on. So I would just say, err on the side of why not? Why wouldn't you want to get healthier in this area? It is so significant. And if we do not channel this part of our life for good, it wreaks carnage, man. And believe me, I see that. I get those phone calls every week, someone else who's ruined their marriage, ruined their family, because this fire has gotten out of control. And I just think, what's to lose by not wanting to get healthier in this space sooner and get to the core of what this is about, like why you're coping and soothing in this way. And one of the things I want to speak to as well, and especially like in the lead up to like people getting married, starting to date someone pre-marriage. And I have a lot of like girls or women who contact me being like, when do I ask about like, are they watching porn? And I was like, yeah, it's a great question. Hey, like, you know, maybe date 2, why not? And how do you do that in a healthy way? And I say it playfully because it matters. Because I think sometimes where I've heard premarital counseling kind of gets it wrong is either thinking marriage and sex will just resolve a lot of this, and it doesn't. But I think sometimes if all we ask is like, oh, have you consumed? Like if someone asked me, hey, Dan, have you consumed porn? Like if they asked me that, and I'd be like, yeah. Okay, like, did you stop? Yeah, I did in my early 20s. Okay. But it's not told you much, right? It's like, you know, Dan consumed porn. You knew he stopped. I think we should believe him, you know? And the question that I think that is more important to ask, and it's twofold, is, but what did it teach you? Not just like how long you consumed it for, when did you stop? Like that's great and that's important.
Of course.
And like, how did that happen would be great to like illuminate as well. But what did it teach you? What vision of men, women, sex, intimacy, love, respect, consent, what did it teach you? Can you articulate that? Can you see how it warped your ideas? How it distorted your sexual scripts, which is just what the academic language, just like how you understand sex to happen. Can you articulate that? Because that would show incredible self-awareness and insight. And so I think that's like diagnosing how it's harmed us. But now for me, the better question and the exciting question, especially for a couple working things out together, is like, what have you done to get a healthier vision, a good vision, a beautiful vision of sex and intimacy? So you've diagnosed, this is what it taught me. And I'll go first. Like, I'll be real. What did porn teach young Dan growing up into adolescence, into adulthood? That women were sex objects. Sorry, friends listening. Like, but it taught me that women were up for grabs, to be used, to enact my continuously more disturbed and graphic fantasies on them. Like, that's what it taught me. That it was all about me getting my sexual desires met. and not to be at all considerate about what made her feel safe, what made her feel pleasure, what made her feel good, and the actual other things that cultivate intimacy in a relationship. So that's what it taught me.
Yeah.
But then the more important question is like, but what have you done now to get a beautiful and healthy and good vision of sex and sexuality and intimacy? What's nourishing your soul in that space, your mind? Like, what are you doing? And that could be having great couples around you who model it, who speak to it, not in a graphic way, but just like talk about the beauty of it. Like one of my mentors shared with me recently, I think he's like 60, and he said his sex life's never been better. I love that. Like that's such a beautiful, encouraging thing that it's like, that's something that they're rediscovering again and again and giving a healthy vision. It's not like he's sharing details, but he's just saying like, hey, this is a beautiful thing that flows from intimacy that has only got better. Obviously, it's had different seasons, like every relationship and journey and everything that goes in that. But like, I love that. But books, like what are we learning? What are we listening to? What kind of things are shaping our vision of what a healthy relationship, marriage, sexuality looks like? And I think that for me is what I think is really important to talk to. And I would say to someone, I would not be committing to a relationship with someone who couldn't articulate that. Genuinely.
Wow.
Being able to really diagnose how it's gone wrong. And it may not just be porn. It could be what Hollywood and pop culture has taught you, you know, like not as bad as porn, but it's certainly not set you up to understand a healthy, sacrificial vision of love. And then, again, and what are you learning? What is it, you know, nourishing that healthier vision that's going to set you up for a faithful, loving, beautiful, intimate marriage that's going to stand the course of time. Like what's helping you to understand that? And I think if someone couldn't articulate that or tell you what they're doing to nourish that now, I would say they're probably not ready to enter into a committed relationship. So to say that they're not worthy of love and grace, and gosh, I've needed it far out. Like, gosh, I've needed new opportunities and to actually go again and refresh and be restored. But I think there's a sense of saying, hey, like maybe get around some others and continue to catch a compelling vision of what this could be and why that's good for you and good for someone that you're going to commit to. It's not about us. It's not just about what I'm going to get from this relationship. It's like, what are you wanting to give to it? And what's informing that? How would you know? What's going to sustain that? So that's one of my biggest things that I say to a lot of people that do premarital counseling. You have to speak to this. And like, we need more than just kind of one word answers. We really want to illuminate the heart and what's going on there.
True. Yeah, true. I guess the question as well that we've been on our mind as well is like, how do we educate like the church to be aware of this? You know what I mean? Like schools is a bit harder because that laws and everything under that for teachers and students, everything. But the church, I guess, like for me, I got exposed to it, like, and we were able to talk about the issues about it in church. Like, how can we like elevate that and just create a like even safer space for even non-Christians to come in and just like see like what we're doing about that, how we can help and everything, I guess.
Great. Well, like clearly you're doing it. Like, you know, this is part of it, normalizing it, having these conversations, sharing of yourself faithfully in this space. But like I see the carnage of all this every day, every week in my work. And so I think there's a sense of, like what does it look like to tell, but not just tell? Because I think, to be honest, religious folks and, you know, institutions have done a lot of telling. But what does it look like to embody a healthier vision of relationships? And not just marriage, not just like showing that heterosexual man and woman thing, but like friendship. What does healthy male friendship look like? What does it look like to actually define intimacy beyond just sex? Because if I say intimacy and you just think sex, like I think you need to expand your vision of intimacy. And that's the sad thing with our culture that's just made everything about sex. And so I think there's such a place to be able to speak to what does that look like? And from within your own values and within your own sacred spaces, speak to that in a way that I think embodies that and points to that and can help people be safe and healthy. And I think one of the biggest things is like, making sure like women especially are safe in churches. Like, because there's been a lot of heartache. And I'll be honest with you guys, it's something that makes me more mad than anything is hearing that like women who have been not treated well by men in churches or on the
church, yeah.
fringes of churches have been kind of told that to fix their marriage, it's like, give him more sex. You know, like, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure that that's
Yeah,
like,
that
you
ain't
know,
it. Yeah.
don't know how that checks out,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like stuff like that, I think we have to be really mindful of like the advice that we're like giving and kind of err on the side of like, how could this affect someone who's vulnerable? How could our messaging be heard by someone who's vulnerable, who might be have experienced sexual trauma or coercion, or, you know, like have been hurt because of all of this? And how do we actually, you know, embody and speak to this in a way that empowers all people, in a way that invites intimacy beyond just marriage, you know, like that actually invites people to learn about what love and intimacy and care and connection is. That's not just, oh, only if you're married. It's like, well, what does it look like to have intimacy amongst friendships? How do we embody that? How do we welcome that? And so I think, yeah, like there's so much you can say, but I think there's so much that we can actually embody and live and do it by our example. Like that's I think what is so important. Like I don't think I had heaps of people sit me down and tell me things as I was like learning what is a healthier vision of relationships and sexuality, but I think just witnessing how my mates treated their wives and how they spoke about things that mattered, I think, like, and witnessing that and family life, I think is so important. And I think in a place like a faith community, we get to see people from different age demographics together. And I think there's such an opportunity to make sure that that is something that invites people so that the young ones, the teenagers, aren't doing it alone. Obviously, they're going to mostly hang out with each other and shape each other, but do they have access and can hear what it's actually like and the beauty of that and the challenges of that and why that's a good thing for them, you know, a healthier vision. And so, yeah, I think there's so much that faith communities can be doing to help and equip. And I think so much of it would be really digging into the research on this and the research in faith communities and then just speaking to this and finding avenues to speak to it. Because I think, you know, there's lots of justice issues out there. This one cuts right to the core of so many people, so many relationships, marriages, homes, and families, and finding ways to address this. I was speaking to a guy yesterday, and he used to pastor a church a long time ago, and he was a young pastor, and he told his story pretty openly. And he then kind of, at the end of sharing that within his church community, said, like, if you want to sign up for something where we can, as a church, go on the journey to speaking to these issues together, like, would you sign up? And he had 100 people sign up by the end of that week. Such was the need, like men and women, predominantly men, but women too, and like people just sharing their stories. And yeah, I think finding a place where they can actually be loved and cared for, whatever that looks like. I think that's probably easier for maybe lay people who come to a church community. What has definitely been a challenge, and in my experience speaking to faith leaders, is like, where can they go if they need support? Because often if like you're seen to be like failing morally in this part of your life, it's like you're done, you're out, you're now disqualified. And I'm not necessarily against the rationale behind it if it's not punitive, but it's actually to like restore someone and attend to clearly what's going on in their life, you know, what's happening for them. I'm all for that. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't cause more heartache, you know, and does it well and does it restoratively for whoever that person is? So I think, yeah, we need a lot more grace and love and care and compassion, knowing that this is just a reality other people are going through. And you'd hope if churches say that that's part of their vision and mission, they could offer that grace, love, care, compassion. Because we all need it.
Yeah, we all do need it. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the note of premarital courses, is there like a right time you reckon? Like, would it be even before engagement, after engagement?
I think before engagement. Yeah, I'm big on that. I think I just know the practicalities. I'm witnessing it around me. Like, once that ring goes on the finger, it's like everything gets straight into business and logistics. And I think sometimes that can cloud the weightier matters that need to be attended to. And I think it's important to discuss this before then.
Yep.
You want to go into getting engaged as eyes wide open as you can be.
Mm.
And this is an area that sadly a lot of people have hidden because there can be shame around it.
Yep.
That needs to come into the light.
Mm.
Because I've heard sadly tragic stories where people haven't spoken about this, and then people have either been harmed or seriously disappointed, harmed at the worst extreme and seriously disappointed in the other, because there was these unspoken expectations about sex and what that means to someone, what it means to the other person. That's never been spoken to. And it is it's the top 3 things that people end relationships or have divorces over, because it is so significant. That, finances, and communication. It's just up there.
Yeah.
It's so significant. It's so weighty because it cuts to the core of us, because it's so sacred what goes on. And so, yeah, I think it's just so essential that we start to at least talk about that way before we even get engaged.
Yeah.
And if you need to have others help you journey through that and to reflect through that. But I think a big thing is owning those stories.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, like I said, whether it's because of pop culture, porn culture, how it's shaped us, and the more we can be grounded and own our stories, it's easy to speak to it. So yeah, there's lots of techniques and tips and principles, and I'll share some resources with you guys that, churches can adopt, or parents can adopt, or, couples can adopt. Principles are great. We need them. And we need resources. But I think a big thing is more of a pastoral soul thing, which is attending to your own story and owning that. Because you can have all the techniques in the world or all the principles, but if you feel so uncomfortable speaking to your partner or your children because you haven't yet owned your story, and it's I don't know what to do with this, and I haven't really resolved it. And there could be trauma there that needs care, that might need, counseling and support. That's not to judge you for that, but it's going to be really hard to then speak into that if we haven't resolved our stories. So people need care, gentleness, time to do that as well. And I think once we've done that, or at least started that journey, it becomes a lot easier to attend to it in terms of teaching principles, helping others.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that. Prevention is better than a cure, right?
That's right. Benjamin Franklin said that, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I don't know who said it, but Benjamin.
Remembers.
It's Benjamin.
That's
good. I wanted to ask as well about, in terms of those that are watching in, tuning in, or people that are struggling with the journey that we're all on, when they relapse, what should they be telling themselves in that moment? How can they pick themselves back up?
Whenever I have that opportunity, I want to say to someone, and I say this to the boys in schools, I say this everywhere, anytime, any place, you are not who the porn industry says you are. The porn industry has such a low vision of who you are as a human creature, as who you are as a man, as a woman. It holds you in contempt. It hates you. That's not who you are. Who you are is someone who is loved and can love. You are someone who has much good to contribute. You are someone of worth, of dignity. You are someone in relationship to others. You are someone of value. And you are someone with still so much untapped potential, talents, gifts, abilities, character still to be formed to offer the world. And I think that is where it has to start. It has to start with your identity, your potential as to who you could be, and that this is robbing from that.
Yeah.
And you may know that, and you may feel the weight of that, but I think coming back to the hope of who you could be and letting that motivate you, that this is appealing to a lesser self, a kind of shadow self, your worst instincts, whatever, way you want to frame that, but that's not who you are. That is not who you ultimately are. Yes, you may experience yourself as someone who has consumed porn, but it's not ultimately who you are. And I think a big thing is to then go on the journey of why I'm consuming, but more why do you want to quit?
Yeah.
And that can't be just because you heard our podcast or your partner wants you to. It's got to be something intrinsic that motivates you. For me, it was having friends come back from Southeast Asia, from Cambodia, with products that had been made by women and children rescued out of human trafficking, used to make porn, used to sexually service Western men. And I just did not want to be a patron of this industry in any way, shape, or form, fueling it indirectly, because it all leads back to exploitation in one way, shape, or form. And that for me was my why. Over the years, I've added to other reasons as to why, which is like I actually want to be a faithful partner and husband and father, and I want to be able to love well, including sexually well. But I think getting that why and having a compelling vision that can sustain us through the relapses, through the disappointments, through the rejection, whatever that may be, and then being able to do like a stock take of like, when are you most tempted to consume? Getting really clear on that. For me, it was around rejection. It wasn't a lust thing. It wasn't a like, oh my gosh, I can't control my sexual desires. It was usually to do with rejection, feeling insecure in myself and needing to soothe that. And I think it's really important to be able to identify that. And that's where the therapy, counseling, needs to come in to really unearth like why. What am I going to with this? And to name it for what it is. And I think we spoke about this, is it's just like, like sometimes we can play it down because it feels pretty awful to have to feel the weight of this. Someone can be like, oh, I've just got like a lust problem. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, let's name it. Like, and that's hard. Like, this is what you're actually doing.
Yep.
You're watching other people be exploited and degraded. And I'm not saying that because I want someone to spiral into shame. I'm saying that because this is what it is. And in some ways, like, I'd be more worried if you didn't feel shame. Can I say that? Like, the people, as Brené Brown says, that don't feel shame are sociopaths. So I don't want you to stay in shame or guilt, which is just a word label we're giving to an uncomfortable experience in here. I don't want us to define ourselves by that, but I'd be far more worried if you never felt that. Because that would say that you do not have a conscience, you do not have a moral compass. And that for me, friends, is far, far more troubling. That is huge alarm bells. So no, I don't want you to stay there, but yeah, we should feel a little bit bad. Not going to lie. There's no real transformation in life without being sick and tired of our, I'll say CRAP. Like, we need to get to that point where it's like, this isn't good. This isn't good for me. This isn't good for others. This isn't good for the world at large. And want better. And to come back to identity and vision that ultimately motivates us. But I think discomfort helps. Discomfort can at least catalyze us in the short term, but I don't think it can deliver us long term.
Not as strong as the why.
Not as strong as the why. And it's also not as strong as putting things in place that make it easier to choose the good. And James Clear in Atomic Habits, he's been speaking about this for years, is discipline is not who's got the most willpower, who's going to get up at 5 a.m. and go and do an ice bath. It's who actually puts things in place that make it easier to choose that. So you're not going to get up at 5 a.m. and jump into an ice bath. I'm not saying everybody needs to do this, by the way, but there is no way you're going to do that if you don't get to bed early, if you don't put an alarm or 3 on, if you don't have a why that you want to do that, and you don't have an ice bath nearby with a schedule structured that enables that. Because if you put those disciplines in place, then that could actually be something you find yourself doing and incrementally. But it might be easier to goal set small things. So I think that is so important. And there's 9 key areas, and I'll send you guys these things to do a stock take on, to be like, am I making it easier to choose healthy and good things in each of those areas of life? Because I think if your vision is like, don't watch porn, don't watch porn, don't watch porn, like that's not it. It's got to be like, for me, it's like, I want to be a healthy man where love and care and compassion inform and illuminate my masculine and sexuality. I want to embody that in those areas of life. That's what's motivating me, not just like, I don't want to watch porn. It has to be something that compels us forward. And I think we can then curate our lives to make it easier to choose that. Who are we hanging out with? Are we sleeping well? Are we eating healthy? Do we have rhythms in place that make it easier to choose good? What are we captivating ourselves with? What are the good and beautiful things that are refreshing our imaginations? Like all of that. It may sound a bit esoteric. It sounds a bit fluffy, but the habits of the heart matter as well as those other disciplines. Like, what are we doing to behold beautiful and good things? And so all of that, I'll send that through so it's
Yeah,
easy to
that'd be great.
see and read in a bite-sized way. But
Mm.
all of that matters.
Mm.
And so back to that person, like, yeah, those are things available to you.
Mm.
You know, one of the things that people would use in a faith tradition is confession. It's something I do. Other people might just say, I'm getting real, I'm being honest. Could be with a friend, mentor, whoever, and just be real with them. Be honest, be fully transparent. Just do that. It's so liberating as well because you don't have to wear a mask. You don't have to pretend. So yeah, there's all these things, and I see them all as an invitation for us to be our healthiest, most alive versions of ourselves. Yep. And so if that's you, there is so much still available to you. Because I've had guys say to me, oh man, I've struggled. I just don't know what to do next. And I'll be like, have you gone and seen a counselor or therapist? No. Okay, well, there's a good start. Have you joined an accountability fellowship group? Nah. Well, there's something else you can do. Have you put some disciplines in place? Nah. Okay, well, that's also something. Have you put some filtering software in place? Nah. And so quite often people will kind of come a bit like hopeless, like, I don't know what's next. And then the reality is they've not even, in my mind, given this a red hot crack for like 6 to 12 months. And it's like, there's never a time to lose hope, but you've still got so many things that you can do and put together to get healthier before you throw in the towel. Come on, man. Have some fight in you and get a vision for your life. And I just want to say with it, again, it has to transcend porn because you can not watch porn, but not necessarily have a healthy and life-giving and beautiful vision of masculinity and sexuality.
Yep.
And so we need to make sure that that is the vision. Because you can not watch porn and not have a healthy vision still. Porn will obviously rob from that, but we need something that's all-encompassing that can sustain us through all seasons of life.
Love that.
It's funny because when you were just mentioning that last bit just then, it just reminded me of the saying that girls like to say a lot, which is if he wanted to, he would. So it's like kind of along the same lines, I feel that, because I read in this book called Rewire Your Heart. I haven't really finished it yet, but they did talk about how, you know, you're struggling to quit because you actually enjoy what you're doing.
Totally.
And so sometimes, you know, you like you said, there's all these tools around, but they haven't really sought out to really.
And you got to find other things to give you that buzz. It's why I say no free dopamine. You got to go find healthy hits of dopamine, right? Go do those things that make you come alive. I don't know what they are for you listening, but I know what they are for me. And I know my life is so much better when I'm finding those things that make me come alive. You know, like yesterday, that was boxing. The day before, it was an ice bath. This afternoon, I'm going to be going and I'm doing painting for the second time in my life. I'm not good at it. I'm not an artist, but it's developing a new skill that gets me out of my comfort zone and that sense of mastery. And by mastery, it's like getting slightly better than how bad it was last time. It's not mastery in the sense of becoming pro. It's like your brain is enjoying that satisfaction of struggling at something and learning a new thing. And every year I try to find 1 or 2 new things to get better at, not to overload ourselves, but that our brains crave that. And we got to find what those are and to do those things. And so, I would just encourage people to like find those things that make them come alive, make them feel good about themselves, and to build on that and to do it in community. There's no superheroes. You can't do it alone. You have to do it with others. And back to that, like if you wanted to, you would. So one of my mentors, he polled hundreds of women in New York City and he asked them, what do you find is the most unattractive thing in a man? And number 1 was like clear standout above everything else. And it was apathy. They wanted men with drive, with vision, with a purpose, with a sense of like gumption, like let's get up and do these sorts of things. And so, I think like in that, like setting that vision and going after it, and you're going to make mistakes in any area of life. You're going to need to get help along the journey and get people who can guide you and help you. But I think it's attractive for you. It's healthy for you, but I think it's just attractive in general. I mean, I'm attracted to any person with vision in a platonic sense. Like I find that captivating, like it's compelling. A person with drive, with a vision, who's up to something good and contributing to the world. So I think guys, if that's you out there or anyone, like, but especially guys, like that's just so important.
Love that.
Wow, that's
beautiful.
So good. How good. I think that's a perfect way to close this conversation. So
Yeah.
I just want to thank you again for joining us, Dan. We really appreciate you having you come down here, taking the time to, just create something amazing with us.
Yeah.
And wish you all the best in your endeavors, and hope to maybe have you on another time in the future.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Excited. I'm looking forward to, when will this drop?
Probably next week, I'd say.
Next week.
Great.
for
Well,
sure.
yeah, watch this space. I'm about to refresh my brand
Yeah.
in a week just after this drop. So watch this
Amazing.
space. If people need to get in touch, like reach out. I'm always learning different people's experiences. So share that. But if there's any resources you need, I'll be sharing it with you guys. And
Yeah.
if there's any specifics that anyone listening is like, oh, I really want to know about this, like please reach out, get in touch via my socials, and ask any questions. Would love to equip others, to continue to help themselves and help others in this space.
100%.
Amazing. Well, thanks again.
No worries. Thanks, gents. Appreciate
Thanks
you.
for listening.
Thanks for listening. We like to say stay fresh, so why don't you look at the camera and tell them stay fresh.
Stay fresh, gang.
Stay fresh, yo.
Stay fresh.